A flight attendant tossed a black CEO's child's pacifier in the trash, but when the father revealed the surveillance footage, the entire cabin went silent. A flight attendant tossed a baby's pacifier in the trash, thinking no one would notice. He didn't realize the father had already been recording every move. The moment that pacifier hit the bin, the cabin's fate flipped. Subscribe if you believe arrogance collapses the instant true vigilance shows up. The moment the pacifier left Lear's mouth, the atmosphere shifted. 1 second, Dr. Kalen Braid was adjusting the infant's blanket, trying to settle him before takeoff, and the next, a sharp hand cut into the space between them. Merrick Voss, tall and rigid in his perfectly pressed uniform, leaned in without warning and plucked the green pacifier from the baby's mouth as if removing contraband. The motion was swift, almost rehearsed, and it stunned Kalen into complete stillness. Leor let out a startled gasp, his tiny body jerking at the sudden loss of comfort, but Merrick didn't even glance at the child. Instead, he held the pacifier between 2 fingers like it was something unpleasant. "It's not FAA compliant," Merrick said, his tone clipped and dismissive, his face expressionless except for the faintest curl of annoyance at the edge of his mouth. Before Kalen could even process the words, the flight attendant turned away, walked 3 steps to the galley bin, lifted the lid with casual indifference and tossed the pacifier inside. The soft thud of plastic hitting the bottom of the container echoed louder in Kalen's mind than it should have. For a moment, Kalen couldn't speak. His hand hovered in midair, still half in the motion of adjusting Leor's blanket. He blinked at the bin, then at Merrick's retreating back. "Excuse me," he started, his voice low, calm by training and habit rather than choice. But Merrick didn't stop. He didn't even pretend to listen. As he walked away, he called over his shoulder, "Sir, please calm your child without unauthorized items." The words were mechanical, but the tone carried something else, something pointed, something that made the nearby passengers glance up with a mixture of confusion and discomfort. It wasn't just a rule being enforced. It felt personal, intentional. Kalen lifted Leor gently, feeling the child's breathing hitch as the first tremble of distress started to build. The baby's face reddened, his eyes watering from the sudden disruption. Kalen whispered reassurance, rocking him slowly, trying everything he knew to prevent the rising upset. But the pacifier was gone, discarded in a place he wasn't allowed to reach, and Leor's need for it was medical, not optional. His son's condition was rare, sensitive, and easily triggered, especially during stressful situations like this. "Sir?" came a voice from 2 rows behind, an older man, soft-spoken but steady. The stranger leaned forward, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "Did he just take that from your child?" Kalen nodded once, barely trusting his own voice not to break into frustration. His mind rushed through possibilities. Should he confront Merrick again? Would that escalate things? Would asking politely even matter now? He could feel the weight of the situation tightening around him, the hum of the aircraft cabin turning harsher, louder, as if amplifying Leor's growing distress. Leor whimpered again, the sound sharp and thin. Kalen's jaw tightened. He had packed that pacifier carefully, sterilized it with his own equipment, checked and rechecked its safety. There was no regulation prohibiting it. He knew the guidelines better than most passengers on board, better, perhaps, than some crew members. Yet the pacifier was thrown away with deliberate finality. A subtle unease crept into Kalen's chest, the kind that didn't come from confusion but from recognition that something was off, something beyond simple protocol. He replayed the moment in his mind, the forced smile when they boarded, the muttered remark he couldn't quite catch, the quick, calculated removal of the pacifier. None of it felt like an honest mistake. He tried again to catch Merrick's attention, raising a hand slightly as the attendant passed down the aisle. "Sir, I need to speak with you about my son's—" Merrick didn't even face him fully. He paused just long enough to make eye contact, the kind that held no warmth, only impatience. "I've already explained the situation," he said with a rehearsed politeness that didn't match the coldness in his eyes. "Unauthorized items cannot remain in use." Kalen inhaled slowly, fighting the instinct to argue. "That pacifier is medically necessary. My son." "If you have concerns," Merrick cut in, "file them after the flight. Right now, I need you to remain seated." The dismissal was final, almost daring Kalen to push back. But the stakes were too high. Lior's breathing grew faster as his cries edged higher, the early signs of distress forming. Kalen felt the pressure building, a knot of fear tightening between his ribs. The moment stretched, heavy with the knowledge that every decision from here on mattered. The older man behind him spoke again, quieter this time, as if sharing a secret that shouldn't have to be whispered. "I saw it with my own eyes." He took it for no reason. Kalen met the man's gaze. The stranger gave a slow, deliberate nod, an unspoken affirmation that Kalen wasn't imagining the hostility. That small gesture steadied him, anchoring him in a moment that otherwise felt surreal. Lior's cries grew sharper, pulling Kalen back to the urgency of the present. He looked at the trash bin again, then at Merrick, then down at his son, whose chest now shook with each breath. He had boarded this plane expecting a smooth, controlled journey. Instead, he found himself standing at the edge of a situation that could unravel in ways he couldn't yet see, but sensed deeply. "He didn't just do that," he whispered. Kalen barely had time to process what he'd just seen. The flight attendant's hand reaching down, snatching Lior's pacifier with clinical indifference, followed by the soft thud of it landing in the trash. The lid snapped shut. It was gone. He turned slowly in his seat, trying to settle the rising tension in his chest. His fingers curled around the edge of Lior's carrier. The baby had stilled for a few seconds, lips trembling where the pacifier used to be. Then came the first wail, sharp, jagged, and unfiltered. Kalen stood up and stepped into the aisle. "Excuse me," he said quietly, intercepting the flight attendant as he returned down the aisle with the poise of someone expecting no resistance. Merrick Voss didn't break stride. His frame was tall, posture rigid, eyes cutting. "Yes?" "That pacifier," Kalen said, voice even. "It was medically necessary. I need it returned." Merrick stopped, turned just enough to meet Kalen's gaze with a narrowed smirk. "Do not confront crew over discarded items," he said flatly. "If you raise your voice or continue this behavior, I'll be forced to report you as a disruptor." Kalen didn't blink. "I'm not raising my voice." "Then return to your seat, sir." Behind them, a few passengers glanced up from their headrests, frowning but staying silent. No one spoke. Kalen exhaled slowly and returned to his seat. Lior was now squirming violently, face turning flushed and red, the cries escalating in pitch. He reached down and tried to calm him, rocking gently, whispering his name, pressing the baby's back to ease his breathing. But it wasn't working. Lior's condition meant extended crying could trigger aspiration, where fluids might enter his lungs through the unprotected palate. Kalen knew every minute counted. He'd designed airway support systems for infants. He'd led seminars on travel protocols for vulnerable passengers. And now, here he was, helpless, in first class, unable to protect his own son from the smallest cruelty. Kalen raised his hand again, motioning for a different attendant. This one looked younger, early 20s, with a pale complexion and nervous energy in his step. His name tag read, Trellin. "Sir?" he asked, leaning slightly forward with professional courtesy. "I need to know if trash bins in the forward galley are monitored," Kalen said, "specifically the one by Station A1. Trellin hesitated, uncertain. I believe all bins are managed by disposal crew after landing, but—" "I'm not asking about cleanup," Kalen interrupted gently but firmly. "I'm asking if there's video coverage near those bins. High contact zones like galleys, They're usually under surveillance for tampering prevention, correct? The young man looked even more unsure. Sir, we're not supposed to. Kalen reached into the inner flap of his coat and slid out a small black card. He handed it to Trellin with care, never raising his voice. Orlin MedTech Dr. Kalen Braid, Senior Safety Compliance Director Trellin blinked as he read it. Then again, as if rereading it made the title more real. The weight of Kalen's identity slowly settled on his expression. I'll check with the cabin lead, Trellin said, almost stammering. Please give me a moment. As Trellin walked briskly away, Kalen looked down. Lior's cries had taken on a new edge, a breathless, reedy cadence that made his father's gut twist. He unzipped the top of the carrier to adjust the child's position, freeing his chest and tilting his head slightly. He rubbed Lior's back with precise fingers, trying to comfort and monitor at the same time. A flicker of motion caught Kalen's eye. 3 rows back, a passenger, elderly, silver hair, wearing a charcoal vest, leaned slightly into the aisle. His face was lined but attentive, brows drawn into a frown of concern. Is everything all right? The man asked in a steady voice. I saw what happened earlier. The flight attendant, he just threw that thing out? Kalen gave a subtle nod, his jaw tight. Yes. The man glanced around the cabin, saw no one else moving, then leaned forward again. Why would he do that? Before Kalen could answer, the voice of Merrick cut through the moment like a blade. Sir, Merrick snapped from further up the aisle, tone sharper now, please don't interfere. The older man didn't move. Just asking a question, he replied coolly, not looking away from Kalen. Kalen locked eyes with the man. In that second, something passed between them. Understanding, support, a silent alliance. I may need your name, Kalen said, voice low, before we land, if you're willing. The man nodded, face steady. I am, he said. Name's Doran Vale. Kalen gave the slightest of smiles before returning his attention to his son. Lior's cries continued, hollow and desperate. The green pacifier, the one thing that eased him, was gone, discarded without care. Kalen's whisper barely rose above the sound of the engine, but the weight behind it was undeniable. This isn't about a pacifier anymore. Sir, please calm your child without unauthorized items. Kalen Braid didn't respond. He simply stared at the trash bin near the forward galley, his expression unreadable. The soft, sucking sounds that had brought Lior comfort had been replaced by a sharp, escalating cry that cut through the hum of the cabin like a blade. The pacifier was gone, confiscated and discarded without warning by the very man entrusted with in-flight care. Kalen's pulse pounded, not with rage, but with precision. He reached into the side pocket of his carry-on and pulled out his company-issued tablet. Merrick Voss, the tall, angular flight attendant with a clipped tone and tight smile, had returned from the galley. His voice rang with false authority as he leaned over the aisle. You're interfering with crew protocol. One more incident and you'll be removed upon landing. Kalen didn't lift his gaze. His fingers danced calmly across the screen as he navigated through Meridian Air's public disclosure library. He already knew where to look. Security compliance documents, embedded clauses, cabin schematics. He found it within moments. Surveillance installation zones. Internal use disclosure. As expected, all high-contact areas, including trash compartments near galley stations, were under visual monitoring due to previous tampering reports filed within the past year. Perfect. He looked up slowly and pressed the screen off. I'm not interfering, he said in a measured tone. I'm escalating. His voice was low, controlled, the kind that disarmed people because it didn't match the tension in the air. It was too calm. Lior's cries had grown desperate now, hiccuping gasps that made Kalen glance instinctively at the boy's chest. He reached down, adjusting the infant's carrier angle slightly to ease any pressure on his airway. A small layer of sweat had gathered on Lior's forehead, and his fists clenched rhythmically as if fighting something invisible. Kalen placed a hand gently on his son's chest, whispering a phrase only the two of them knew, a melody of comfort they'd practiced in quieter hours. A row behind them, a man's voice cut through the uneasy quiet. "Excuse me." Kalen looked over. An elderly passenger, late 60s perhaps, leaned forward, eyebrows raised beneath silver-framed glasses. His expression carried a subtle mixture of curiosity and indignation, like a man used to courtroom questioning rather than airline drama. "I saw what happened," he said. "That man took the baby's pacifier and threw it away. Why?" Merrick's head snapped around. His voice tightened. "Sir, please don't interfere. Passenger conduct is being monitored." But the older man didn't budge. "This isn't right," he said, louder this time, looking straight at Kalen. Kalen met his gaze for the first time, a full, deliberate moment of recognition passing between them. Two strangers bound by a simple act of decency. "I'll need your name before landing," Kalen said, voice steady, though his fingers curled slightly over the armrest. The man didn't hesitate. "I am," he replied, straightening in his seat with quiet resolve. "Name's Doran Vale." The moment the digital complaint was filed, everything changed. Merrick Voss stood at the galley terminal with sharp precision, tapping selections on the crew tablet, his lips pressed into a thin line. Without making eye contact, he marked Dr. Kalen Braid as a Class II behavioral concern, the kind of label that sticks, even when unjustified. A red icon blinked next to Kalen's name on the manifest. The atmosphere in first class, already tense from the earlier pacifier incident, thickened with invisible weight. Most passengers remained quiet, heads lowered, headphones on, but eyes watched from the corners. They had seen something, but no one dared to say it. Meanwhile, Lior's cries, once rhythmic and mild, had turned sharp, gasping, choked and erratic. Kalen's heart pounded as he leaned in closer to his son. The baby's cheeks were turning blotchy red, his breath hitching between sobs. It wasn't ordinary crying anymore. It was distress, medical distress. Kalen reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. With steady fingers, he launched the Orlin MedTech emergency app, a tool originally designed for field trials and rapid documentation. He tapped into the infant monitoring interface and began recording a short video, framing Lior's heaving chest, flushed skin, and strained sobs. His voice remained low and controlled, narrating every detail into the microphone. Patient is 8 months. History of soft palate irregularity. Pacifier removed forcibly by crew. Distress response escalating. Potential aspiration risk within 10 to 15 minutes if not calmed. He uploaded the footage to a secure server, attaching his credentials, timestamp, and medical notation tags. A quiet ping confirmed it was logged. Footsteps approached. Kalen glanced up to see Trellin, the younger attendant from earlier, hovering nearby, uncertain, his eyes darting between Kalen and the front galley. "Sir," Trellin whispered, bending slightly, I'm not supposed to get involved, but here." He discreetly slipped something onto Kalen's tray table, a folded napkin. Kalen opened it. In neat block letters, a message had been printed with deliberate care. "Check gate records. Voss has prior flags." Kalen's eyes narrowed. Gate records? That kind of data wasn't public, nor visible to rank-and-file attendants. How did Trellin know that? Why was he risking this? Their eyes met. Kalen mouthed, "Thank you." Trellin nodded slightly and walked away, disappearing into the rear galley like a ghost slipping through a crack in the wall. Then a sudden wheeze. Lior's body arched slightly in the carrier. His mouth opened wide, but no sound came out. A gasp. Then another. Kalen's instincts surged. In one motion, he unbuckled his seatbelt, swung his legs to the aisle, and knelt beside the carrier. He gently lifted Lior out, adjusting his posture to reduce pressure on the airway. With practiced hands, he leaned the baby forward slightly, massaging the base of the neck to stimulate calm breathing while keeping the chin supported. He whispered, not to soothe Lior, but to steady himself. "You're okay. You're okay. Dad's got you." But it wasn't enough. The baby's breath came in short, strained bursts. Each second mattered. A shadow fell across them. Marek. "Return to your seat," he snapped. His voice was sharp and unforgiving, but laced with something more dangerous, power unchecked. "You are in violation of federal safety protocol. This is your final warning." Kalen didn't respond. He kept his hands gently on his son, focused entirely on Lior's trembling body. "I said, sit down." Marek barked louder, his voice drawing the attention of every passenger in first class. Eyes lifted. Some whispered. No one moved. Kalen finally looked up, his expression unreadable, not defiant, but resolute. His voice was calm, low, dead steady. "Call them." The wheels touched down at Aldemir Terminal 3 with a subtle jolt, but Kalen Braid did not rise. While the rest of the passengers stood, reached overhead for their luggage, and shuffled into the aisle with practiced impatience, Kalen remained seated, his hand gently rocking Lior's carrier as the child whimpered in uneasy sleep. His mind was not on the arrival, but on the surveillance footage he knew existed, footage that could either be buried or brought to light, depending on his next move. Marek Voss had disappeared into the galley the moment the seatbelt sign switched off. Trellin, the younger attendant who had quietly helped Kalen earlier, lingered at the far end of the cabin, throwing glances toward Kalen with a nervous twitch in his jaw. Something in the air felt heavier now, not just post-landing fatigue, but the weight of something unraveling. Two men entered the cabin. One wore the blue uniform of airport security, his posture stiff with authority. The other, taller and dressed in a charcoal-gray blazer with the Meridian Air insignia on his lapel, scanned the cabin until his eyes landed on Kalen. "Dr. Braid?" he asked. Kalen stood slowly, cradling the back of Lior's head. "That's me." "Elric Davin, Corporate Operations. I've reviewed the initial incident report. Normally, any passenger dispute would be forwarded to internal review after deboarding. But—" He paused, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "Your medical documentation triggered a red flag on our compliance grid." Kalen didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Then I'd like to formally request footage from Cabin Sector A1 under your company's transparency clause." He handed Elric a paper, neatly folded but already creased from his pocket. It was an excerpt from Meridian Air's contract of carriage, printed in full. The highlighted section read, "In the event of a documented medical disruption, cabin footage from applicable sectors may be reviewed upon formal passenger request for safety verification purposes." Elric blinked, unfolding the page fully. The security officer stood by, silent but alert. "That clause is almost never invoked in flight," Elric said, scratching his chin. "But it's legal," Kalen said calmly, the way someone does when they've already prepared for resistance. "And binding." Elric scanned the page again. His pupils flicked between paragraphs, and then, without looking up, he gave a slow nod. "Give me 20 minutes, he said at last. Kalen lifted Lior's carrier and stepped out into the arrival terminal. The air was cooler than expected, tinged with the sterile chill of industrial circulation and the faint scent of citrus disinfectant. He moved slowly through the terminal toward baggage claim, the fluorescent lighting reflecting off the tiled floor like fractured glass. Near Carousel 3, he found an empty bench, set Lior beside him, and lowered into the seat, exhaling fully for the first time in hours. Every moment on that plane had been tightly measured, his tone, his posture, even his restraint. But now, the real test was beginning. A shuffle of shoes caught his attention. "Mind if I sit?" came a voice. Kalen turned. It was Doran Vale, the elderly man from row 5. still sharply dressed, his coat folded neatly over one arm. Kalen nodded. "I gave my statement," Doran said, settling beside him. "Told them what I saw. I wasn't raised to keep quiet when a child's well-being is brushed off like trash." Kalen's eyes remained on the floor. "Thank you. Your voice might have tipped the scales." Doran shook his head. "That man, Voss, he didn't just act out of procedure. He acted out of something else. Contempt. Ego. Maybe worse." Kalen gave a tired smile. "I don't think it was about the pacifier. Not anymore." The carousel buzzed and jerked to life. People gathered like reflexes, reaching for bags, checking tags, pushing past each other with the choreographed chaos of arrivals. Elric returned, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. "Dr. Braid," he said, nodding. "Step aside with me." Kalen followed him to a quieter corner between two terminals. Elric unlocked the tablet, turned it toward Kalen, and tapped a file labeled Cabin Sector A1, 1142 AMUTC. "I have the footage," he said, "but you're not going to like it." Kalen watched the screen, watched Merrick walk past his seat, watched the pacifier taken, watched the smug pause, the look back over the shoulder, the flare of cruelty in his smirk, the drop into the trash bin as if tossing a candy wrapper, not a child's medically necessary comfort. "I want this preserved," Kalen said without blinking, "and reviewed under formal escalation." Elric hesitated. "If I do that," he said slowly, "it won't stay internal. Voss has a record. 2 prior verbal incidents, 1 borderline complaint filed last year, but no confirmed infractions." "You have confirmation now," Kalen said. A long pause stretched between them. Elric looked around, lowered his voice. "There's chatter inside the operations channel. Someone's been covering for him. You didn't hear this from me, but the name Relin Doss came up. Our ops director. This may go higher than Voss." Kalen stared at the tablet screen one last time before locking eyes with Elric. "Then we go higher too." Elric said nothing, but he didn't look away. As Kalen turned to leave, Lior stirred in the carrier, his small fingers twitching in sleep. The terminal noise faded behind him. Doran Vale caught up, adjusting his coat. "If that man thinks he can get away with this," Doran said, his voice calm but firm, "he chose the wrong father to provoke." Kalen didn't blink. He threw away the wrong pacifier. Kalen stood still, his posture composed but unreadable, as Elric Davin approached with a sleek black tablet cradled in his left arm like it carried more than footage, perhaps burden or confirmation. The airport's quiet hum served as a backdrop, soft and sterile, punctuated only by the distant clack of luggage wheels and the low murmur of arriving passengers. Elric's shoes echoed slightly against the tiled floor as he stopped directly in front of Kalen and extended the device without ceremony. "You're not going to like this," Elric said, voice low, eyes dark beneath his neatly combed silvering hair. Kalen said nothing. His hands, one still gently supporting Lior's sleeping form, the other free, moved deliberately as he took the device. The moment his thumb tapped the screen, the video came to life. There was no dramatic music, no slow zoom, just raw, silent cabin footage, colored by the pale blue cast of overhead LEDs. The angle came from a ceiling cam mounted at the forward end of first class. It captured everything. Merrick Voss, in his sharply pressed uniform, walked into frame with precise, almost performative intent. His stride was slow, calculated. He approached Kalen's seat like a man approaching a chess piece he already intended to knock off the board. Kalen's own figure could be seen gently adjusting Lior's blanket, unaware of the storm about to hit. Then came the moment. Merrick leaned in, said something inaudible. Elric would later confirm the original audio wasn't retrievable, and with a practiced, smug swipe, removed the pacifier from Lior's mouth. The infant flinched, startled. Kalen looked up sharply. But Merrick was already walking away. And this was where the footage became more than just evidence. It became intent. Near the galley, Merrick paused. He didn't just dispose of the pacifier. He looked back, over his shoulder, his lips curling into a faint smirk. Then, with exaggerated flourish, he flicked the pacifier into the open trash bin like tossing a bottle cap in a barroom bet. His head nodded slightly, as if congratulating himself. Kalen didn't react immediately. He watched the clip again, then again, his mind parsing every frame not just for what happened, but for why. Next to him, Elric broke the silence. Notice how he waits for eye contact. That's not protocol. That's targeting. Kalen nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of what he'd just seen. There was no anger in his expression, only precision. He turned to Elric. "Can this be downloaded?" Elric exhaled, a practiced motion from someone used to delivering guarded answers. "Internal only, unless it becomes part of a legal review or internal tribunal." Kalen tilted his head slightly, then escalated. That response visibly unsettled Elric. He shifted his stance, adjusting the angle of his ID badge. "If I do that," he warned, lowering his voice, "it won't stay internal. Voss has a record of prior infractions, verbal misconduct, at least 2 other passenger complaints, but no one's ever had proof." Kalen's voice was quiet but steady. "Now you do." The words landed like a gavel, but what Elric said next changed the air between them. He leaned in slightly, speaking just above a whisper. "This could go higher than Voss. He's backed by someone." Kalen folded his arms slowly, letting the silence stretch long enough to become a statement. "Then we go higher, too." Kalen uploaded the files with steady, deliberate motions, the glow of his laptop reflecting faintly across the hotel suite's dimly lit walls. He did not hesitate, did not pause to question whether revealing this much documentation was excessive. His fingertips moved across the trackpad with precision, dragging medical logs, telehealth records, and annotated screenshots into the digital folder marked Leor Incident, Meridian Air 744. The air was still except for Leor's soft, exhausted breaths from the portable crib beside the window. The child slept deeply now, but the remnants of stress lingered on his tiny face, flushed cheeks, a quivering sigh every few minutes. Kalen's jaw tightened as he watched him, the memory of the flight attendant's dismissive expression still burning in his mind. He hit Upload, and the progress bar rolled forward. As each file transferred, Kalen felt the weight of the day settle on his shoulders, not as fatigue, but as purpose. When the final document synced, he leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "Now, the truth exists in more than one place." It felt like a shield, thin but real, a step toward accountability. The first tremor of public reaction came faster than he expected. His phone buzzed on the desk, and Kalen glanced over to see a notification from an aviation ethics thread. A short, cryptic post by Doran Vale. The retired lawyer had written only one line: "Infant pacifier confiscated mid-flight. Father has surveillance. Accountability has wings." The words were vague but sharp enough to spark curiosity. Within minutes, the post began branching into replies, retweets, and speculative commentary. A small ripple, but a ripple nonetheless. Kalen exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He hadn't wanted attention. He wanted justice and safety. But once the story began to circulate, he knew there was no reeling it back. He closed the curtains halfway, dimming the outside city lights, and checked the crib again. Leor shifted slightly, clutching at the blanket with his small fist. Kalen reached down, smoothing the fabric gently. "You're safe here," he murmured. "I'll take care of the rest." The next morning began with a sound that made him pause, the soft chime of an encrypted email arriving. Kalen opened his laptop, expecting a routine follow-up from Orlin MedTech, or a message from one of his team members preparing for the Aldemir summit. Instead, the sender line read, Meridian Air Internal Oversight Division. His breath tightened. He clicked the message. It was formal, sterile, and carefully worded. The division requested a full debrief regarding the recorded in-flight concern and attached a proposed confidentiality clause. The text was clear. By agreeing, Kalen would be restrained from public disclosure and required to route all commentary through Meridian Air's internal channels. He leaned back, reading the clause twice, then a third time. His heartbeat remained steady, but his expression hardened. He knew what confidentiality meant in corporate terms: silence, control, containment. It was not an offer. It was a lid. He tapped the delete key without replying. Moments later, his phone screen lit up again, this time with an incoming message from an unknown number. The preview displayed only 2 words. Check this. Kalen opened it. A video file began downloading, tagged with Trellan's initials. His pulse quickened. He plugged his phone into the laptop, transferred the file, and clicked play. A screen recording appeared, capturing an internal crew log interface. Trellan's cursor scrolled through entries, stopping on one timestamped during the flight, long before the Pacifier incident. The log displayed an entry submitted by Merrick Voss labeling a passenger in Seat 3A as uncooperative. Seat 3A had been Kalen's. The realization struck him like cold water down his spine. He replayed the moment Merrick walked past him before takeoff, the restrained smile, the muttered words, the tension beneath the surface. The hostility had begun before Lior cried, before any rule was addressed, before a single request had been made. This was premeditated. The recording ended. Kalen sat still for a long moment, breathing in the heavy quiet of the room. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened laptop screen, steady eyes, set jaw, a man who understood systems and tactics, who recognized manipulation not by accident, but by design. A soft knock came from inside his thoughts, the instinct that something larger was unfolding. Bias was one thing, a pattern was another. But to pre-label a father, before conflict, before context, suggested intention. Kalen closed the laptop, stood slowly, and crossed the room, the shadows of the suite stretching behind him as the afternoon light faded. He picked up his phone and replayed Trellan's message carefully. He filed the report before the conflict even started. The attendant smirked, confident his prank would go unpunished, unaware that every camera angle, every witness, and every second of evidence had already been captured by a father who never misses a detail. If you believe cruelty under a uniform always folds when strategy meets foresight, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The more Kalen uncovered, the darker the implications became. The moment Trellan forwarded the anonymized chat log, Kalen felt a cold jolt run through him. The screen displayed a time-stamped message, preserved with perfect clarity. Put that pretentious dad in his place before we even hit altitude. Merrick's name was not directly listed, but the crew ID code matched his. The tone alone revealed enough. It was boastful, deliberate, and dripping with a satisfaction that made Kalen's stomach tighten. He read the line again, slower this time, feeling the weight of each word. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a poor choice of attitude. This was premeditated. He sat forward in the dim hotel room, the glow of the screen bouncing off the glass table. Lior slept nearby in his travel crib, unaware of the storm tightening around his father. Kalen whispered to himself. He was proud of it. Proud of what he did. His voice trembled not with fear, but with the sharp clarity of a man connecting pieces that were never meant to be linked. Another notification appeared. Trellan again, sending an additional attachment. Kalen opened it, expecting another log, but instead found a scanned document, an old job application. He frowned, adjusting his glasses. The top of the form read, Applicant, Merrick Voss. Below it, the emblem of Orlin MedTech stared back at him, making Kalen's breath stall. He scrolled down, his eyes narrowing as he searched for dates and signatures. Then he saw it. Submission timestamp. 1 year to the day before the flight. He leaned back slowly, mind racing through scenarios, motivations, and consequences. No, he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. He knew exactly who I was. A strange silence blanketed the room, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. Kalen reached for the document again, studying Merrick's signature as though the ink itself held intent. A rejected application could wound pride, yes, but to retaliate like this? Against a child? The realization sank deeper. The attack wasn't random, and it wasn't impulsive. This was planned, he murmured, voice low and certain. The words tasted bitter, heavy with the gravity of what they meant. Suddenly, the strange hostility Merrick showed during boarding made sense. The forced smile, the muttered comment Kalen couldn't hear, the unnecessary enforcement of non-existent rules. Everything had been set in motion long before the plane ever left the ground. Determined, Kalen straightened, his expression tightening into one of controlled resolve. He opened a secured channel with Elric Davin and forwarded the new findings. Elric responded almost instantly with a terse message. "We need to move. Now." Minutes later, they were on a call, Elric's voice low and urgent. "You understand what this implies?" Elric asked, pacing somewhere out of frame. His silhouette moved sharply against the corporate glass wall behind him. "Yes," Kalen replied calmly. "It means internal misconduct isn't enough. This is targeted malice, and it affects passenger safety. I'm invoking the misconduct trigger." Elric stopped moving. "That obligates a review board within 48 hours. His voice carried a mixture of caution and respect. "Are you prepared for that?" Kalen looked toward Lior, sleeping peacefully under his small knit blanket. "Yes," he said, "because this can't happen again. Not to anyone." With Elric's guidance, Kalen filed the trigger, each keystroke precise and deliberate. Once submitted, there was no reversing it. The system confirmed the escalation with a sterile yet powerful acknowledgement. Review board initiated. Mandatory convening. 48 hours. But Kalen's work didn't stop there. He opened a new case file, this time addressed to the Regulatory Transport Ethics Board, the RTEB. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment as he gathered his thoughts. He would not exaggerate. He would not embellish. He would simply present the truth, backed by evidence so solid that no one could dismiss it. He uploaded a redacted version of the surveillance footage, deliberately focusing on Merrick's expression, the hovering pause, the calculated glance over his shoulder, the faint smirk just before he tossed the pacifier into the bin. Kalen included timestamps, policy references, and a concise summary of events. He ended the submission with a clear statement. This act constituted intentional interference with an infant's medically necessary item. When he pressed submit, the room felt impossibly still, as though holding its breath. Less than 10 minutes later, the response arrived. A single line, a single decision, a single confirmation that the situation had reached a level far beyond an internal dispute. Your submission has activated a Tier 3 investigation. 2 days after the incident, the statement from Meridian Air dropped like a wet cloth, limp, dismissive, and meticulously worded to suppress outrage before it could bloom. An internal misunderstanding, it read, in bold sans-serif font, tucked halfway down a sterile press release. The public was told that the crew member involved had been placed on temporary leave pending internal review. No names, no footage, no mention of the child. The word pacifier never even appeared. Kalen Braid stood by the window of his hotel room, overlooking the dense arterial lines of Aldemir's industrial skyline. The city was humming, indifferent. In his hand was a sealed envelope, delivered minutes earlier by front desk staff who'd said only, "This was left for you. No return info." His fingers hesitated as he broke the seal. Inside was a memo, printed on official Meridian Air letterhead. Its title alone made the air in the room seem thinner. Exception Clearance Override, Merrick Voss, authorized by Director Relin Doss. Kalen read it twice. His mind locked onto the final line, a small but damning reference to compliance shielding under intra-division discretion. He didn't sit. He paced, the memo trembling slightly in his hand. Relin Doss. That name wasn't just familiar, it had come up years ago during a corporate audit review at Arlen MedTech. Doss was more than a director at Meridian Air. He was a silent investor in several competing biotech firms, including Biotrellic Systems, one of Arlen's fiercest rivals. The puzzle clicked together with brutal clarity. This wasn't random. This wasn't about an FAA rule. It wasn't about a pacifier at all. It was about a threat, a professional, public threat. And Kalen wasn't being targeted as a father, he was being targeted as a name. His phone buzzed. "Trellin?" Kalen answered sharply. The voice on the other end was tight with urgency. "Dr. Braid, something's wrong. I just tried to pull the crew interaction logs for backup and—" A pause. "They're gone. The records are being purged. Timestamps, incident tags, even cabin notes. It's like someone's wiping Merrick's footprint from the flight entirely." Kalen's voice dropped. "You're sure?" "I cross-checked 3 systems. It's not a malfunction. Someone's inside. They're erasing what happened." Kalen's response was immediate. "Then we go public." Kalen clicked Post without flinching. The title glared back from the screen like a challenge. Protocol or prejudice? What really happened on Meridian Air? Flight 744, no hashtags, no dramatic fonts, no photoshopped graphics or appeal to outrage. Just facts. The kind of facts that carried weight in professional circles, time-stamped screenshots, annotated cabin policy citations, verified medical credentials, and calm language sharpened like a scalpel. He hadn't named the flight attendant, not directly, but he didn't need to. Every document in the post had been vetted by Kalen 3 times. Every phrase had been measured to avoid legal missteps. It was precise, surgical, and devastating. The final paragraph carried a quiet tone of resolve. "This is not an accusation. It is a record. I believe accountability in aviation cannot be optional, especially when it involves medically vulnerable passengers." He sat back in the armchair of his hotel suite, breathing out through his nose. Lior lay asleep in the portable crib nearby, a soft blanket rising and falling with each breath. Outside the window, the lights of Aldemir shimmered against the glass towers, indifferent and gleaming. Within an hour, Kalen's post had been reshared over 200 times, not by anonymous profiles but by people with titles, pediatric specialists, aerospace safety consultants, compliance attorneys, flight ethics board members. His inbox began to fill with quiet messages of support, a few cautious inquiries, and then the ripple effect he anticipated. By 6:47 a.m., 3 national outlets had requested interviews. But it wasn't the press that gave him pause, it was the subpoena. A digital copy had landed in his secure account just before sunrise, issued by the Regulatory Transport Ethics Board. The language was brisk. Request for immediate transmission of all personal documentation relevant to incident on Meridian Air Flight 744. Executive crew communications under subpoena. Confidentiality clause active pending review. Kalen read it twice, then forwarded it to a trusted aviation ethics lawyer with no message. The work had begun. Then came the broadcast. He hadn't known Doran Vale would speak publicly. But as Kalen sipped black coffee, the news stream played across the wall-mounted screen in his suite. The station had cut to a split-screen format. The anchor on the left, Doran's face filling the right. No lower third graphic could quite capture the weight of what the elderly man was about to say. "I saw it with my own eyes," Doran said, voice steady, hands folded in his lap. The man, the crew member, took the baby's pacifier and threw it away as if punishing the child. And the father, he never raised his voice, not once. The interviewer blinked, clearly expecting a longer answer, but Doran didn't waver. His pause was the statement. And in that moment, something shifted. Kaylin felt it, the current changing, the silence that had once protected the guilty beginning to crack. The power was no longer with those who had hidden behind uniforms, behind protocol, behind official reports marked insufficient evidence. Now, the silence was a spotlight. Within the hour, professional networks lit up. Lawyers clipped the interview. Medical travel advocates published joint statements. A child safety coalition tweeted an open letter to Meridian Air demanding answers. On one forum, a former flight ethics auditor simply posted, "What kind of person confiscates a pacifier from a teething infant?" Kaylin watched it unfold with the stillness of a man who had already prepared for every reaction. Yet what struck him wasn't the outrage. It was the eerie quiet from Meridian Air. No rebuttal, no clarification. Only a short, templated message in their newsroom. Meridian Air is aware of circulating passenger claims and is reviewing the matter per internal protocol. No further comments at this time. Cowards, Kaylin thought, and he meant it clinically, not emotionally. Delay was their first defense mechanism. Stall until interest faded. Mute until memory softened. But this time, memory had a face, Lior's, and now, a voice, Doran's. Kaylin closed the laptop slowly, his eyes drifting toward his son. Lior stirred, then settled again. The crib's side panel still had the printout Kaylin had taped to it. "Medical needs on board. Please consult father before interfering." A warning, once ignored, now a declaration. Outside, rain tapped against the glass in soft rhythms. He stood and walked to the window, hands behind his back, posture straight. He didn't smile, didn't speak, didn't move for a long while. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, the same voice he used when he calculated the inflection of every word in his statement, Kaylin said, "Now, it wasn't just about the footage. It was about who stayed silent." The offer arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with Meridian Air's embossed insignia. It was delivered not by courier, but by a concierge who avoided eye contact as he placed it on the desk of Kaylin Braid's hotel suite. The paper was expensive. The language inside, more so. In exchange for a full public apology, travel credits equivalent to $10,000, and a formal letter of regret from the Vice President of Passenger Affairs, Dr. Kaylin Braid would agree not to pursue litigation or participate in any public discourse about the events of Flight 744. At the bottom was a signature line and a waiting non-disclosure agreement. Kaylin read it once, then again. His expression never shifted. Lior, asleep in the crib nearby, stirred softly. An hour later, a discreet message popped up on Kaylin's secure cloud server. It was from Elric Davin, the same Meridian Air official who had first shown him the surveillance footage. The message was short, typed without flourish. "They're going to offer you a private settlement. Don't take it. There's more you haven't seen." Kaylin didn't reply. He didn't need to. The letter from Meridian Air still sat unopened on the corner of the coffee table, now marked by a fresh coffee ring, unnoticed, like the pacifier they had tossed away. Instead of responding, Kaylin powered on his laptop and opened the folder labeled Lior Incident, Meridian Air 744. With slow precision, he created a new project, Passenger Clarity. It wasn't a statement, it wasn't an outburst, it was a structure, a living platform with secure upload options, timestamp verification, and passenger-verified logging systems for reporting mid-flight ethical violations. Kaylin coded through the night, occasionally glancing at Lior, who breathed softly beside him. The project went live before dawn. By the time sunlight cut through the Aldemir skyline, The site had already received over a dozen submissions. By midday, there were more than 300. Some were minor, disrespectful tones, ignored medical notes, poor treatment of elderly travelers, but others were chilling. One report read, Flight 191, October 14th. Attendant Voss reprimanded my autistic son for making noises. Took away his calming toy. Another. Voss again, Flight 308, threw away my daughter's glucose pack, said it was unauthorized gel content. Almost caused an episode. Kalen's hand tightened around the edge of the desk. The name repeated too often, and the pattern was unmistakable. Then his phone rang. An unlisted number. He almost didn't answer. "This is Kalen," he said, keeping his voice low so Lior wouldn't stir. The voice on the other end was quiet, deliberate. "My name is Draylen Voss. I'm Merrick's brother." Kalen's spine straightened. Draylen continued, his tone brittle. "We haven't spoken in years, not since our father died. But I saw your platform. I recognize the name. You don't know the half of it." Kalen paused, then walked to the window, pulling the curtain closed. "Tell me," he said. Draylen sighed. "My brother. He's been doing this for years, targeting people, mostly ones who look like they don't belong in first class. It's always subtle. He plays by the edge of policy, so no one calls it what it is. But it's always the same. Humiliation, removal, control. And if someone pushes back, he escalates. Files reports first, paints them as hostile." Kalen stayed silent, letting the weight of each word settle. Draylen's voice cracked slightly. "I warned HR once. Back when I worked near a regional hub, I thought they'd care. But he had protection. Someone higher up who kept wiping his record clean." Kalen's hand hovered over his laptop mousepad. "Director Relin Doss," he said. There was silence on the line. Then, "You already know." Kalen's thoughts moved rapidly. He looked at the screen, submission after submission pouring in, and imagined how many more stories had never been told. Not out of fear, out of futility. Because silence had always been the system's expectation. Draylen broke the pause. "I don't know what you plan to do with all this, but if you need a statement, I'll give one." Kalen didn't hesitate. "You'll give more than that," he said. "You'll help us document every case." Across the city, at Meridian Air's legal headquarters, a team of attorneys was preparing a second, more generous settlement offer, unaware that the man they were trying to silence had already rewritten the script. Kalen ended the call and reopened the passenger clarity dashboard. A new submission had just arrived, this one with a supporting photo of a confiscated comfort item held up mockingly in front of a crying child. No names, but the man's sharp jaw and signature posture were unmistakable. He clicked Save, added it to the log, and whispered aloud, not to himself, but to the system that had failed too many. "Then we document every case." Public hearings began with no preamble. Kalen Braid sat in the front row of the Regulatory Transport Ethics Board chamber as the first name was called. "Dr. Kalen Braid, you may approach." He rose slowly, adjusting his blazer, his fingers brushing against the corner of the folder labeled Flight 744, Passenger Record. His posture was composed, but the air around him felt heavier than ever, not because of nerves, but because the moment had arrived when silence would no longer be a strategy, but a weapon. The chamber lights were stark. Every cough echoed. Behind him sat journalists, ethics officials, aviation board members, and 3 other fathers who had reached out via Passenger Clarity. 2 of them nodded when he glanced back. The third looked down, tears shining in his eyes. Kalen placed the folder on the witness table and looked toward the panel. "We're not here to debate inconvenience," he began, his voice steady. "We're here because my son's medically necessary pacifier was removed and discarded mid-flight. We're here because the crew member who did it had a documented pattern of misconduct. We're here because, until now, no one listened." The lead commissioner, a stern man with silver-framed glasses, leaned forward. "Dr. Braid, are you saying the airline had prior warning signs?" Kalen didn't answer immediately. He opened the folder and slid a sheet across. "These are internal crew logs sent anonymously. In them, Flight Attendant Merrick Voss preemptively labeled me a non-compliant passenger before any interaction occurred. This wasn't a reaction. It was a strategy." The chamber rippled with murmurs. "What's your source for these?" another board member asked, skeptical. Kalen turned slightly toward the gallery. A tall man in civilian clothes stood and nodded once. It was Trellin, still unnamed, still anonymous, but present. "That man was part of the crew. He gave me the documentation under risk of termination. His statement was submitted under protective confidentiality. The time-stamped logs match surveillance footage." The panelists flipped through their copies. A large screen behind Kalen activated. On it played the same footage Elric Davin had shown him: Merrick's calculated pause, the deliberate toss of the pacifier, the smirk. Kalen didn't turn to look at it. He had memorized it frame by frame. "This footage," he said, gesturing without glancing, "was nearly withheld. It only surfaced because Meridian Air's Clause 7B on medical response was violated. That triggered a review. But you'll also find another memo, one naming Operations Director Relin Doss as having granted override clearance to Voss. That made this not a lone incident, but a protected pattern." One of the panelists exhaled sharply. "We received that memo yesterday. Anonymous source?" Kalen nodded. "Untraceable, but it matches internal formatting. Same headers, same security stamp." The room shifted again, from suspicion to gravity. "Dr. Braid," the commissioner asked quietly, "why didn't you go to the press first?" Kalen looked at his son's photo projected beside the footage. Lior, peacefully asleep, pacifier in his mouth. "Because the press wants sound bites," Kalen replied. "My son deserves standards." As the day wore on, more witnesses came forward. Cross-passenger testimony revealed that Merrick Voss had confiscated items or verbally reprimanded at least 4 passengers on separate flights, 3 of whom were young fathers or men traveling with infants. The records were buried as passenger escalation events, never naming Voss. One of the fathers, a man named Draylen, spoke up at the hearing's close. "I didn't file a report because I thought it was me, that I wasn't dressed right for first class, that I didn't look the part. Now I realize it wasn't about me. It was about someone like me." The comment silenced the chamber more than any document ever could. Outside, news trucks lined the curbs. Reporters shouted questions, but Kalen avoided them. He had no interest in headlines. Inside, momentum was building. The term "the pacifier principle" began circulating in articles and blogs, not just about what happened on Flight 744, but about how Kalen handled it. Quietly, strategically, without shouting, without spectacle. Investor pressure mounted. At the next Meridian Air board meeting, a vote of no confidence was introduced against Relin Doss. It passed with unanimous shareholder support. Kalen read about it on his tablet the next morning, while sipping tea beside Lior's crib. At that same moment, Passenger Clarity's homepage recorded its 1,000th submission. Aviation ethics groups now linked directly to it from their official portals. Beneath Lior's image, captured mid-laugh during a doctor's visit, a quote had been permanently added in grayscale font. It read, "Silence is not surrender. It's strategy." The first time Kalen saw the aircraft again, it was silent, stripped of passengers, humming faintly under fluorescent hangar lights. Flight 744 stood docked for mandatory inspection, its once polished frame dulled by routine, weather, and time. Kalen stepped onto the hangar floor without ceremony, his ID badge clipped plainly to his coat, his movements steady. He didn't approach the aircraft like a passenger. Not anymore. He approached it like someone returning to a crime scene. not in anger, but with the quiet authority of a man who had turned violation into justice. A row of mechanics worked beneath the forward galley panel, tools clinking against metal, gloved hands pulling out components for audit. None of them paid Kalen much attention. One technician, a middle-aged man with streaks of oil on his forearms, nodded slightly in greeting. Kalen returned it. He wasn't here for them. In his right hand, he held a small object, a clear, solid replica of Lior's Pacifier, cast in transparent resin, its shape preserved down to the air holes and delicate flange. He had commissioned it privately, not as a symbol of grief, but as proof of transformation. What had once been dismissed as a non-compliant item now stood as the catalyst of sweeping aviation reform. Weeks earlier, the scandal had cracked open. After his refusal to sign Meridian Air's non-disclosure offer, Kalen's platform, Passenger Clarity, had taken on a life of its own. Within 48 hours, submissions flooded in from across the country. Medical incidents, silent retaliation, unjust protocol enforcement. And sprinkled among them were echoes of Merrick Voss, incidents eerily similar in tone and structure, previously ignored, now catalogued and time-stamped with photographic evidence and passenger logs. It was no longer just about Lior's Pacifier. It was a pattern, one that had been buried under bureaucracy for years. Public hearings had followed. Kalen sat through them all, mostly silent. He watched others speak. A pilot testified about forced silence due to internal loyalty codes. A father recounted a missing stroller report dismissed mid-air. A quiet businessman revealed his formal complaint against Voss had been reclassified as noise disruption. The weight of suppressed stories collapsed onto Meridian Air like gravity long overdue. And then change began. Meridian Air announced a set of sweeping reforms. Cabin surveillance footage would now be preserved for a minimum of 90 days. A new crew accountability division would report independently of operations, bypassing any internal chains of protection. Passenger complaints could no longer be buried by departmental discretion. Every crew member would undergo implicit bias certification, and every infant medical item flagged during boarding would require a documented rationale. No more verbal FAA justifications without evidence. Kalen declined every media invitation. Book offers, keynote speeches, guest lectures, he turned them all down. He wasn't interested in fame. He returned to his lab at Orlin MedTech, where neural interface trials waited. But something had changed in him. Quietly, he redirected his time and funds into a side initiative, the Lior Foundation. The Foundation's goal was simple: protect infant medical needs during air travel. But its real mission was broader: to institutionalize dignity where silence had once been survival. Pediatricians, technologists, aviation advisors, and transport ethicists came together under one charter. Within months, 3 major airlines signed on to pilot the Foundation's infant flag protocol, a system that allowed medical tags to sync with boarding data, ensuring trained oversight without public shaming. Yet none of this explained why Kalen returned to the aircraft hangar. He moved slowly now, his shoes echoing faintly against the polished floor. The hangar doors were half open, spilling late-afternoon light into the workspace like gold on steel. The aircraft loomed before him, its front landing gear slightly tilted as engineers extracted and logged worn panels. Kalen walked past rows of seats, the very ones where he had once knelt, holding Lior upright, fighting the tremor in his son's chest while being threatened with removal. He paused near the galley, the same trash unit still affixed in its housing. A quiet voice interrupted. "Dr. Braid?" Kalen turned. It was one of the junior technicians, a thin young man in a black jumpsuit, grease on his sleeves. "I'm Kalen Voss. No relation," the tech said quickly, perhaps having heard the stories. "Did you want to see the unit that was logged during the incident?" Kalen shook his head gently. "No, I'm not here to look backward." He stepped closer to the forward cabin door, now open, sunlight glinting off its edge. In his hand, the resin pacifier caught a beam of light and refracted it in small rainbow arcs across the floor. He stood there a long moment, the hum of tools continuing behind him, the memories of Lior's cries no longer haunting, just echoes folded into time. His breath was steady, his jaw firm, his purpose unshaken. He raised the pacifier to eye level. It was clear, flawless, and immovable. "You threw this away like it was nothing," he whispered, "but it became everything." By the time the surveillance footage played, the crew was frozen in shock, the attendant's arrogance completely exposed, and accountability enforced instantly. If you believe real authority acts with precision, preparation, and unstoppable resolve, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores abuse of authority, disrespect, and the power of evidence in holding people accountable. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage reflection on justice, integrity, and protecting the vulnerable. Calculated. He approached Kalen's seat like a man approaching a chess piece he already intended to knock off the board. Kalen's own figure could be seen gently adjusting Lior's blanket, unaware of the storm about to hit. Then came the moment. Merrick leaned in, said something inaudible. Elric would later confirm the original audio wasn't retrievable, and with a practiced, smug swipe, removed the pacifier from Lior's mouth. The infant flinched, startled. Kalen looked up sharply, but Merrick was already walking away. And this was where the footage became more than just evidence. It became intent. Near the galley, Merrick paused. He didn't just dispose of the pacifier. He looked back, over his shoulder, his lips curling into a faint smirk. Then, with exaggerated flourish, he flicked the pacifier into the open trash bin like tossing a bottle cap in a barroom bet. His head nodded slightly, as if congratulating himself. Kalen didn't react immediately. He watched the clip again, then again, his mind parsing every frame not just for what happened, but for why. Next to him, Elric broke the silence. Notice how he waits for eye contact. That's not protocol. That's targeting. Kalen nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of what he'd just seen. There was no anger in his expression, only precision. He turned to Elric. "Can this be downloaded?" Elric exhaled, a practiced motion from someone used to delivering guarded answers. "Internal only, unless it becomes part of a legal review or internal tribunal." Kalen tilted his head slightly, then escalated. That response visibly unsettled Elric. He shifted his stance, adjusting the angle of his ID badge. "If I do that," he warned, lowering his voice, "it won't stay internal. Voss has a record of prior infractions, verbal misconduct, at least 2 other passenger complaints, but no one's ever had proof." Kalen's voice was quiet but steady. "Now you do." The words landed like a gavel, but what Elric said next changed the air between them. He leaned in slightly, speaking just above a whisper. "This could go higher than Voss. He's backed by someone." Kalen folded his arms slowly, letting the silence stretch long enough to become a statement. "Then we go higher, too." Kalen uploaded the files with steady, deliberate motions, the glow of his laptop reflecting faintly across the hotel suite's dimly lit walls. He did not hesitate, did not pause to question whether revealing this much documentation was excessive. His fingertips moved across the trackpad with precision, dragging medical logs, telehealth records, and annotated screenshots into the digital folder marked Lior Incident, Meridian Air 744. The air was still except for Lior's soft, exhausted breaths from the portable crib beside the window. The child slept deeply now, but the remnants of stress lingered on his tiny face, flushed cheeks, a quivering sigh every few minutes. Kalen's jaw tightened as he watched him, the memory of the flight attendant's dismissive expression still burning in his mind. He hit upload, and the progress bar rolled forward. As each file transferred, Kalen felt the weight of the day settle on his shoulders, not as fatigue, but as purpose. When the final document synced, he leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "Now, the truth exists in more than one place." It felt like a shield, thin but real, a step toward accountability. The first tremor of public reaction came faster than he expected. His phone buzzed on the desk, and Kalen glanced over to see a notification from an aviation ethics thread. A short, cryptic post by Doran Vale. The retired lawyer had written only one line: "Infant Pacifier confiscated mid-flight. Father has surveillance. Accountability has wings." The words were vague but sharp enough to spark curiosity. Within minutes, the post began branching into replies, retweets, and speculative commentary. A small ripple, but a ripple nonetheless. Kalen exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He hadn't wanted attention. He wanted justice and safety. But once the story began to circulate, he knew there was no reeling it back. He closed the curtains halfway, dimming the outside city lights, and checked the crib again. Lior shifted slightly, clutching at the blanket with his small fist. Kalen reached down, smoothing the fabric gently. "You're safe here," he murmured. "I'll take care of the rest." The next morning began with a sound that made him pause, the soft chime of an encrypted email arriving. Kalen opened his laptop, expecting a routine follow-up from Orlin MedTech or a message from one of his team members preparing for the Aldemir Summit. Instead, the sender line read, "Meridian Air Internal Oversight Division." His breath tightened. He clicked the message. It was formal, sterile, and carefully worded. The division requested a full debrief regarding the recorded in-flight concern and attached a proposed confidentiality clause.